to living with drought is Nevada has a pretty sparse hydrological and meteorological data collection network as it is, so we don't have a lot of on-the-ground observations. And as anybody that's been in Nevada at any amount of time knows, our population is also unevenly distributed. We have a lot of people in Reno, a lot of people in Vegas, but not a lot of observations in the rural communities, and rural communities are impacted by drought. And our basin and range topography, our geography makes things difficult, because what happened in my backyard might not be the same as your backyard, because all of that elevation change matters for where precipitation falls. So we have a complex physical geography, we have a complex kind of population geography, and we also have a complex legal geography in that we are 89% federal lands. A lot of this is not privately owned property, so just getting information and feeding that up is sometimes difficult. And the impacts of drought are felt differently. And people, we don't have a real culture of information sharing about drought, and that's what we're trying to build with Living with Drought, is a place and space and practice of that, even when we're out of drought. So what can we do about drought? So I'm really pushing for building this network of reliable volunteer observers to report their conditions. And we can do that, one, to improve the spatial resolution, so we know what's happening across the state better. If we have people doing it frequently, we'll have a better temporal resolution of the data. Data sharing is one of the key things that's going to make us more resilient to drought. So just providing this information is helpful. But also we can develop, for many of the folks that are on this call, for states, tribes, irrigation districts, and water districts, we can also work to develop drought plans. So first, reporting conditions. So later today, I'm not sure if she's next or later today, but Kelly Smith's going to talk to us about Seymour, which is condition monitoring reports. The other way that you can report that is available is the Cocorahs, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. I'm the state lead for Nevada for that. So if you have questions, just go to Living with Drought or me and ask. But this is the rain gauge network, where we put a low cost $40 rain gauge in our backyard and report when it does or does not rain. And reporting zeros is really helpful. But they also, Cocorahs has condition monitoring of their own that's separate from but complementary to and to the Seymour reports. So if you prefer or are already a Cocorahs user, you can submit condition monitoring reports that way too, and there's instructions there. But that's simply for those of you that are familiar with the landscape, know what drought looks like, just going in and letting us know, is it abnormally dry, wet, or normal in your area right now? And doing that periodically when we are and are not in drought would be really helpful for us, so we could have a real good baseline data. Why am I asking for this? It helps to track drought and improve coordination and collaboration. It communicates that local scale, hopefully up to the state and further up, so that we can share information regionally and nationally about how drought is impacting us and what our resource needs are. It fosters more local, state, and regional connections and partnerships, which really helps us when drought happens to be able to react and respond to drought if we already have connections with each other. So why should we plan for drought? One, like I said in the beginning of the talk, it's a feature of our climate. Even if we're not currently in drought, there will be a future drought. And also, I'm encouraging people to develop drought plans because they're good to have, but I don't say this just to have it in our back pocket. But recently, Congress passed that $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan. And of that, there's opportunities for financial assistance in the law that are to provide substantial water supply and other benefits to drought-stricken regions. So a lot of this money is with an eye towards the West. We're expecting $50 billion to be spent over the next 5 years, with over $400 million coming to various water projects in Nevada. So resources, even if not available now, we expect resources will become available. And so developing those drought plans are sometimes a prerequisite to getting some of that funding. So I know my understanding is that is true, for example, the BOR Smart Water Funds. I'm not sure about that, but that's what I've heard. But developing these plans will certainly give us a leg up, or looking at these funding opportunities as an opportunity to develop these plans might also be one of the ways that we can use this money. But there should be more funding come available, particularly to deal with drought. So, in my last few minutes, and I hope I have a few minutes, a minute or two, I just wanted to go to the actual Living with Drought page. Oops, it didn't, I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you see that?
Yes, I could see it. You got 3 minutes, Carrie Jean.
Great, so I'm gonna take us to, oops, why won't my, that's funny, I can't get my, there we go. Just watch me struggle here for a few minutes. There we go. So if we go to the resources page where I have information about drought impacts and report your conditions, that's more for the citizen science, for the citizen to try to get them informed on drought impacts and why we want them to report. But for those on the call, there is information here for agriculture and livestock. So this is things to help you prepare and recover for drought, tools. There's recreation information available. So if you want to know about lakes or Burning Man, the fire restrictions, residential and landscaping. I know that SNWA and TUMWA have this information on this website, on their websites, for any rural communities or small providers, you can point, small water providers, you can point them to Living with Drought, your homeowners or landscapers, if they're looking for conservation tips or other resources to help develop their, water smart garden and such. There's information specific to tribal nations for them to plan and respond to drought. And then here is the one that if there's our resources that are statewide. So if you are looking for that drought forum report from 2015 and the recommendations, you can find it here. If you're looking at what our current plans that are on the record are, you can find them here. But you can also find these drought planning and preparedness guides if you want to start to prepare a drought plan so that you can be in the better position to secure funds should they become available, when they become available. We know they're coming. And then lastly, we have, we also have weather and climate here, which is the latest information or weather and climate that's not specific to drought. And I also encourage you to go to the Nevada State Climate Office if you're looking for weather and climate data. I link to that too. And lastly, wildfire. Of course, there's current conditions, the outlooks, and the resources here. I would be loath to not say that my program was named after the very successful Living with Fire program in Extension. So there's also information, you can go there if you're interested in living with fire. But that's it for me today. That's Living with Drought. And we hope that this website is a resource for you. If there's information you'd like to see here that you don't see here, feel free to reach out to me. I am at your service, and I really hope that this can be a landing spot that has everything that you need. So with that, I'm open for questions or turning it over to Bunny.
Thank you, Carrie Jean. That was an awesome presentation. And now let's see, Nicole, do we have any questions for Carrie Jean? And just a reminder that we are using slido.com. And to do that, there's a link going to slido.com, and in the participant, you don't need to sign up for anything, you're just a participant. You put in #NV drought. Nicole?
Yeah, we have a few questions, and all participants are also encouraged to upvote the questions to give us an idea of what everyone's interested in. The first question, I think Steph partially answered it with a link that she put in here, but the question is, how can people join Cocorahs, and are there places where we need more observers?
Yes, so you can join Cocorahs on the Cocorahs website, which you can find on my website, or you can go straight to Cocorahs themselves. If you join in Nevada, we really need folks along the Highway 95 and in rural communities. That's the two highest areas of need, but if I want to make sure that I also have Yerington, Austin, this is according to my partners. Yerington, Austin, Eureka, Ely, Pinoche, Caliente, and Moapa Valley are the highest areas of need anywhere along US 95, really off I-80 and near Lake Tahoe, in areas of also California, that are part of our watershed in Kingsbury, Glenbrook, Topaz Lake. So a lot of spots actually, but those are our highest areas of need currently, but we'll take anybody because all data is good data.
All right, the next question. What aspects of drought communication and collaboration would you like to see improved upon within Nevada? Where do you think we have the most room to make gains?
Oof, that's a tough question. I think we are making gains, we're making small gains, but I think better collaboration and information from a more widely distributed area. I think more information from rural communities, more information about how it impacts ag and farming and ranching would be better. We'd be better served with more fine information about those type of impacts. I also wanted to share that you can sign up for my newsletter where I share information periodically on my website. And right now, while we're in severe and kind of statewide drought, we're also sharing the Nevada drought updates that the State Climate Office is making. We push those out monthly with that newsletter. It's not really a newsletter. It's too short to be called a newsletter. Information, news, it's an update.
All right.
More questions, Nicole?
Yeah, do we have time for more?
We do.
What's one thing you would recommend or communicate to the average citizen living with drought in our state?
What is one thing I would like to commend? This is obnoxious, but I would say you can help. Become a Cocorahs observer and let us know that when there's zeros. Reporting zeros are I hate to say they're not a good learning experience. Teachers don't use them. Like, it's not that fun. There's no competition between grandma and mom, but really just having, it's really easy to be a Cocorahs observer, to put a rain gauge in your backyard when we're not. It's really easy when we're in drought. It's harder if you're in a wet region. So if people have the capacity, I would say just reporting their zeros, or reporting if you are a regular recreationalist or somebody that is out in the environment, knows what the environment looks like when it's under stress, and maybe you're not directly impacted by drought, but you see the impacts of drought, reporting that to Seymour, just sharing that information. Really, even I want to encourage people to have the confidence to share the information, and that no amount of information is too small.
Do you believe we have time for one more question if there is one?
Okay. Can we measure that the response to drought is better now than in the past?
Ooh. I don't know. I'm going to take an honest, can we measure if I don't know. Can I say I don't know? I just don't know. How do we measure that? Maybe that's a group panel question. Maybe we can ask this at the end to everybody that's participating.
I think that's fair enough, Carrie-Jean. That is a tough
Thanks.
question.
Sorry, I'm going to write that one down. That's a really good question.
It is.
I know that I feels that way.
Right. Response to drought. Okay. All right. And with that, thank you, Carrie-Jean, so much. Let's move on to our next panelist, and a round of applause for Carrie-Jean. Thank you. Okay. Our next speaker in here, and I think you need to stop sharing screen, Carrie-Jean, so that Kelly can take control. But our next speaker is Kelly Smith on condition monitoring observer reports, also known as Seymour. Kelly Helm-Smith is the Assistant Director of the National Drought Mitigation Center, and her research focuses on drought impacts. Among other things, she is interested in how people experience drought in different parts of the country. She is going to tell us about the Seymour system for collecting people's observations and experiences. Welcome,
Okay.
Kelly.
Thanks, Bunny. You're seeing my screen now?
Looks great.
Okay. So the map that you see on the left there is what the Seymour map looked like at the end of 2021, zoomed in on Nevada for the entire year. So the Seymour reports are somewhat sparse, but as Carrie Jean said, all reports are helpful. Those dots on the map are there because someone took the time to report what they were seeing. And I have the Drought Monitor report or the Drought Monitor map juxtaposed because the Drought Monitor kind of drives a lot of the conversation around drought. And sometimes people use Seymour kind of as a way to be part of that conversation. Drought Monitor authors assure me that they will never change the depiction of drought on the map because of what somebody said on a Seymour report or how dry or wet someone said it was. But they do say that whether it's one report or 100 reports, they will look more closely to see whether there's something going on in the climate data that may or may not be fully reflected in people's experience. So kind of a schematic of how the information flows. We have individual observers, people who are out and about. Maybe it's a Cocorahs observer who's away from their normal location. Maybe it's an extension agent, a farmer, a rancher, a homeowner. It can be somebody like me who rides their bike around and takes pictures of stuff. So you see something that you think or know is because of drought, you take a photo or you just submit an observation without a photo to the Seymour system. It's all Esri based. It's using a survey 123 form, works from a browser or mobile, and it appears immediately on an online map. So anyone's observations are immediately available then on this map to US Drought Monitor authors, also to state climatologists, state task forces, people involved in assessing drought for state decision-making and also for making recommendations to Drought Monitor authors. And one point I'll make, and I'll highlight this more later, is that for the most part, individuals, although this is out there on the web, a few people find it and spontaneously individually use it. For the most part, people use this system because they're encouraged to use it because they're part of a network or an organization that sees a value to it. So that seems to be the most successful mechanism. This is what the Seymour project landing page looks like. This is the map from 2021. Again, 2022 is still pretty sparse, but there is a map, a link to the 2022 map, a link to the archive of maps of all the observations we've gotten since we started in 2018, a fact sheet with some kind of tips on how it works, a video, it's a recording of a presentation similar to the one I'm giving at this moment, if someone wants to watch a canned presentation, and social media resources that a state or someone, a National Weather Service office could use as you're going into drought or ongoing drought. Just tweet it out and say, hey, tell us what you're seeing, submit a report here. And then you can also submit a report, get to the form from here a couple different ways. The submit a report button takes you to the browser version of the form, or either submit a report by app, or if you use the camera on your phone and scan the QR code, that will prompt you to download the app and then the survey and let you start entering reports that way. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to walk through the process of how to get it set up on your phone. It's not that hard, although the first time is always the hardest. And it works pretty well. I'm not super tech savvy. So the first question it asks, whether you're on your browser or on a phone, is to pick a language. The current choices are English or Spanish, and it's this little widget up here in the top right that gives you the choice of languages. Then there's a location widget. There are a few different ways that you can put in your location. If you do not want to have your precise location identified, you can type in the name of the city or county, and it'll be mapped based on the centroid, and that is close enough. You can touch the compass icon, unless you're using a VPN, in which case it totally doesn't work. But you can touch the compass icon and it will find your location. Or you can position the marker on the map. I think you kind of move the map around under the marker. Or if you're using the app, it just knows. If you have enabled use location, sometimes it gets it down to a meter or two. It's almost, it's very precise. Then there's a location quality control step. This doesn't actually position your marker on the map, but once in a while we get reports where the marker is appearing in the middle of the ocean, or they say it's Indiana and it's Ohio, things like that. This helps us do kind of a course scale location quality control. We make sure we assign it to the correct state and county if it's not already there. Then the date defaults to the current date unless you pick something else. We use the same 7-point dry to wet scale that Cocorahs uses for their condition monitoring reports, which makes it possible to map Seymour reports and Cocorahs reports on the same map and compare them, which is really nice because Cocorahs reports tend to come in consistently over time, but they're a little bit more sparse spatially, and Seymour reports tend to come in kind of in a big clump, or when people are particularly aware. They may not already be associated with Cocorahs or anything else, and they hear that this is where you register what you're seeing, and so we tend to get them all at once. So it's good to be able to compare and contrast, cross-validate. We have an experience question that relates to drought monitor levels. So if somebody had been in their location for 20 or more years and they say, I've never seen it like this before, or I've only seen it this way once before, you'd know it was at least a severe drought, kind of based on the percentile categories. We're not doing much with this at this point because we're still gathering enough data to see whether it's meaningful. But it is an interesting concept that a climatologist proposed to us. Then we have a new block of questions this year for reporting normal or wet conditions. This is in support of the idea that we'd really like people to report at regular intervals over time. Possibly, we have a few people who do it weekly. I think those are Cocorahs observers who just want even more opportunities to report. So they're really well habituated to regular reporting. Even monthly would be very helpful though. We'd like to see what things look like in dry, wet, and normal conditions to have that basis for comparison. So the normal or wet conditions block includes questions like, is it more green than usual for this time of year? You don't need to water your lawn and garden, the kinds of things that might come up in a wet or normal year as opposed to a dry year. Then we do have a lot of checklists for several different sectors. As Carrie Jean emphasized, everybody experiences drought differently depending on what they're trying to do with water. So if you are producing crops, you might want to expand the crop production impact sector. Likewise for livestock, there's a community hydropower section, health, several environmental questions, some fire related questions. If we go and expand the impacts checklist for crop production, you see several, basically it's a did you experience this question for different aspects of crop production, less water for irrigation, reduced yield, insect infestation, and so on. And at the bottom of each of these blocks of sector questions is an other option that allows people to enter text and describe what else they may be experiencing. Then there is an option to upload photos. We hear from people that photos are especially valuable in assessing conditions, although photos are not mandatory. There's some copyright information provided. We've tightened that up a little bit this year to be very explicit that the observer retains copyright, but we have permission to use it by uploading the photo. They agree that we or our state partners, others involved in assessing drought conditions in an official capacity may use it for education and management purposes. We definitely wouldn't, periodically people contact us and say, could we use this photo in a textbook? And we put them in touch with the original photographer if there's any kind of profit or exchange of dollars involved. And usually as a courtesy, if we're going to use it for anything that circulates very widely, we try to contact the person and just let them know so they can let their mom know or something, so they can be proud of it. Then there are questions about identity. People can identify themselves by role, extension, livestock or farmer, livestock producer or farmer, homeowner, outdoor enthusiast, etc. In the past, we have had, we kind of heard that one or two extension agents might not be comfortable identifying themselves as such. And this question is optional, so they can just skip it and leave it blank if they don't want to identify themselves as an extension agent or anything else. Then we provide an option this year, this is new, for people to tell us how they would like to be identified. Some observers say, please use my name, use the name of my ranch. They really want to be identified by name and by place for credibility. They've got name recognition in their community. Other people are more skittish and maybe have very good reasons for wanting to be more, to not reveal their specific name, especially with their exact location revealed or close to exact location. So then they can make up a name like, Happy Farmer 42 or Dusty Rancher 76, whatever. Part of the reason for doing that is so that if somebody is coming into the public view where we don't display identifying information, they may want to know whether reports, there's a cluster of reports from the same area or reports over time from the same area. They may want to know if it's from the same person, which is a very legitimate question. And that helps the observer build credibility, and it helps users assess the value and understand that information, interpret it a little bit better. And then we do ask for the name and the email, and there is an option for state partners and others who are kind of part of the official drought community to go in behind the scenes and have access to all of this information. And then once you click submit, you go and find your dot on the map. And this was actually a really nice example from near Henderson last March. Someone took the time to submit, this is what it looked like last March, a dry year on top. And then the year before was wetter, same stretch of highway, but obviously the vegetation color is quite different. So that's what it looks like when people submit photos on the map. And this year, Esri, like other software companies, keeps changing and improving things. So the map and everything else looks different this year because the type of map we were using is no longer supported. So we've reconfigured things. So it shows up on a dashboard. First view is year to date. So you're seeing all the reports year to date, and it's always just the most recent US Drought Monitor, the current US Drought Monitor map, because there's not really a way to, otherwise the dates get very messy on that. Here's what it looks like if I have selected the past 7 days, the state of Texas, severely dry, people who have said that it is severely dry, and reports with photos. That narrows it down quite nicely. You see this kind of muddy stock pond or pasture that someone has reported. Then there is a legend icon that shows you, in this case, the dry to wet scale, and also the US Drought Monitor status, what that means, because that layer is turned on. If the default view of layers, there are layers on the dashboard that's actually pretty powerful. It lets you delve into the different sectors. The default view is that the overview layer is on, that's the map of everything, and the Drought Monitor current week. If I turn off the Drought Monitor and say I only want to see reports with photos, this time I've clicked on one from North Dakota that's showing us some dry pasture land. Then you can also click on crop production. That's another one it lets you drill down into. We're seeing this time reports from Texas and from Wyoming.
Kelly, 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Then there's also this menu item option in the top right-hand corner that takes you to a companion web app. This lets you have a little bit more fine-grained control of the time interval you're looking at. We've also got these filters that let you highlight specific individual impacts, such as insect infestation. So it gives you kind of more granularity in how you want to look at the impacts. Quick few examples of use cases. Missouri in 2018, still this is the densest I've ever seen it on the map. Pat Gannan, the state climatologist there, has a history of recruiting impact reports and does a good job. In 2018, things were really looking bad for farmers and ranchers, were facing really adverse conditions. They had a late freeze and a lot of things going on. So they conducted what they called a statewide media blitz to get people to submit reports to, as they framed it, help the Drought Monitor authors get it right. They got the Missouri cattlemen involved and they worked through their networks. And there was just this tremendous, there are about 1,400 reports that came in from Missouri that year. And State officials' approach was, again, all data is useful, trust but verify. So there was the possibility that someone might be exaggerating conditions for the prospect of financial gain related to the livestock forage disaster program. But again, the reports would tell them where to look. Let's go there and verify that this is happening. Without the report, they wouldn't know to look there. Georgia in 2019 had a similar approach. They had a much briefer flash drought in October. And again, I think it was just very efficient to be able to funnel all of these reports into a system and instead of taking individual phone messages or emails and trying to get them to the right person, they would just divert people to this Seymour system, which kind of was a big funnel, and then it puts it right on a map. In 2021, North Dakota Extension adopted Seymour early in the growing season as they were going into drought, and they got the livestock extension specialist to submit once a week. So that was a really good, credible over time set of reports that they generated. And Oregon Forestry also had some luck with using a specifically branded Oregon Forestry survey, and they recruited reports through the media and things like that. So one of the main next things that we're doing, you can't see it from here, but behind the scenes, if Nevada wanted to have its own version of a Seymour form, we can help you configure it so that it says Nevada Seymour reports or whatever you want it to say, and it will funnel onto the main survey. But you can, if you want to eliminate some of the question blocks, you can do that. So there are some ways you can tailor it that may work better for a state or a sector or something like that. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kelly. That was an excellent overview of Seymour. And I just want to remind everybody we're using slido.com for questions and comments. There's a link and the participant password in the chat. Nicole, do we have any questions for Kelly?
Yes, the first one is, what are some of the more interesting or surprising impacts that have been reported?
Some of the things that actually stick in my mind are some of the photos are pretty striking. And occasionally, as I've done some analyses on like Missouri, I really dug in to see what are Cocorahs saying, what are the other observers saying. You kind of, especially for the people who submit more than once, you get a feel for their operation and their farm. And, it's like there was an observer who, I wanted to go visit their farm in the Missouri, sort of floodplain. I'm sorry, the Mississippi River floodplain. You just get a real feel for place, I think. And occasionally there are interesting impacts like wildlife related and bees and things that are a little bit off the norm of, crop and livestock production.
Okay. And the
Thank
next,
you. We have another one.
Next question is, beyond the Drought Monitor, are Seymour reports used for other purposes?
Yes, different states make different decisions related to drought. Sometimes there are different state programs that benefit agricultural producers, and knowing where to direct those state resources is also helpful, but obviously every state is different.
And there's one more. Is there adequate staff or funding to verify a cluster of reports like those that you showed? Could protocols be overwhelmed with too many submissions?
If there's too many submissions, they'll just be ignored, honestly, or they won't, you'll just see a mass of color on the map. It's really up to the Drought Monitor authors. Don't do individual report verification. They would look at an area on the map if they're seeing a lot of reports and look at the climate data, but they're not trying to verify reports one at a time. And state officials, if they were trying to verify every report, I suspect that time and resources would become a limit, but we actually have language that says you're not applying for assistance by submitting this report. You're contributing to an archive of what people have seen. So hopefully there's not the expectation that every report is going to have a specific outcome.
Okay, and that's all I'm seeing for questions.
Okay,
All
thank
right,
you,
thanks,
Kelly,
everybody.
very much. And now it is time to move into our break. Also at this time, let's see, we just want to remind you that since UNR is a host of this meeting, UNR Extension, we would like to better understand, oh, wait a minute. Yes, we'd like to better understand who's with us today. So if you would please fill out an optional anonymous 3-question poll survey, that would be great. That would help UNR Extension out. And then let's see, time, where are we? Going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be reconvening. Let's see, let's say, they're saying Dave could use even a couple extra minutes. So maybe we can start at 58 and take a 10-minute break. And let me share my screen. So let's do 9:58 and take a break. Thank you, everyone. Also, if you want to add questions or comments, go to slido.com. See you in a minute, or 9. Okay, everyone, welcome back from break. And now we will resume the second half of our workshop today. Our next speaker is David Simmerl, and he's going to be providing an overview of the U.S. Drought Monitor. David Simmerl is a climatologist at the Desert Research Institute and Western Regional Climate Center. He has been an author for the U.S. Drought Monitor since 2012. And you can take control whenever you're ready, David.
Okay, thank you. Just a moment. Can you see my screen?
I can. It's not in full presentation mode yet.
How about now?
Now it is. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to get started here. First, just a quick outline of my presentation. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about the Drought Monitor, what it is, who creates it, what the map is used for, the process behind making the map. I'll go into a little bit on the indicators and indices, as well as drought in Nevada and some of the challenges in monitoring drought in Nevada. So most of you are probably familiar with the Drought Monitor, but I'm going to go into some of the basics of it. It's essentially a composite drought map, which is a snapshot of the current state of drought across the United States. And it's jointly produced by National Drought Mitigation Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, the USDA, and NOAA. It is not a model or a drought forecast or drought declaration. It's part of a drought early warning system for NOAA NIDIS, as well as an integral part of drought planning, preparedness, and mitigation efforts at various levels in government. So who creates the map? Currently, we have 9 national authors for the Drought Monitor, and they are located here where I'm at, Desert Research Institute. We've got 3 at the National Drought Mitigation Center, 1 at the USDA in DC, 3 at NOAA, or at NOAA, National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center, as well as 1 at NOAA NCEI in Asheville. All the authors are meteorologists or climatologists that work at regional or national centers. And we generally all work rotating shifts. We work 2-week shifts, back-to-back shifts, 3 to 4 times a year. We also added a page 2 author in 2019 as we started to do analysis for the US affiliated Pacific Islands, as well as the US Virgin Islands as well. And all the authors do quite a bit of work like this, doing outreach and interviews with media and so forth. So part of the Drought Monitor process, we have a large group of contributors from every state in the country. And on the right, you can see this is, we have a listserv, an email listserv that is basically a conversation about drought that's going on throughout the year. And this is where we as authors received input from the various states. And these are the number of people that are on the listserv from each of the states. That doesn't mean that's all the people that are involved in kind of drought monitoring and providing input. There's behind the scenes state level teams, and all those people aren't necessarily on the listserv. And you can see the breakdown on the pie chart on the lower left of the kind of representation of the people that are on the listserv. Majority of them are from NOAA. You've got a good chunk of people from academia, as well as other state and federal agencies. And this is kind of the backbone of the US Drought Monitor. So there's a lot of exchange going back and forth between the states on the listserv, and they essentially provide ground truthing for the data indicators. Who uses the USDM? It's used by a wide variety of government entities, including on the federal level, the USDA, as you can see, kind of in the middle bottom, that's the current USDA secretarial drought designations. It's also used, one of the programs that is used quite a bit and important in Nevada, as well as across the West, where a lot of grazing goes on, is the LFP program. And that provides drought disaster relief for farmers and ranchers. And you can see on the map up above in the middle, those are basically the Drought Monitor map, and the designations are part of the eligibility for this program for disaster relief funds. And these are the amount of dollars in millions that have gone to each of the states during these periods. And then other applications of the Drought Monitor, it's used by the IRS, as well as the National Weather Service offices. As you can see here on the right, they put out these drought information statements. And obviously it's used quite a bit for the media and the general public. And we get quite a bit of traffic on the USDM site, with over 12 million hits a year. So the concept, the Drought Monitor concept, as I mentioned earlier, it's a consolidation of indices and indicators into one comprehensive drought map. Again, it's a snapshot of the current situation, not a model, forecast, or based on any sort of single indicator or index. It's a hybrid approach of both objective measures as well as subjective measures. And what we're trying to capture in the map is the drought's magnitude, which is a duration and intensity, the spatial extent of the drought, probability of occurrence, as well as both short-term and long-term impacts. And we use percentile ranks, looking at the data indicators, to provide some level of objectivity in our analysis. Most of you are probably familiar with our severity classification. As you can see, we've got the map up in the upper right-hand corner, and this is our drought classification table. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, these are the categories, and D1 through D4 represent the different categories of drought. D0 is not considered drought. And then if you look to the right on the table, you can see these are kind of our core indicators. And these are the either percentile ranges, which each of the categories, for example, the D0 for the CPC soil, you can see 21 to 30th percentile. So we would be looking at data indicators and soil moisture that would be falling within those percentile rankings. For other indices like the PDSI, these are more standardized numbers, and those are basically, you know, the number that associated with each of the rankings. So we also look at drought impacts, both short-term, long-term, and often combinations of the two. We rely on local reports as well, which are often much more subjective, as Kelly mentioned. And to provide that objectivity, we look at historical rankings and these data indicators. So we hear a lot of, you know, subjectivity and some of the recommendations, especially in terms of impacts, where people are saying, you know, it's never seen it this dry before and so forth. But we try and look at the data indicators and have that drive the map. Some of the assessment tools that we use, we have both quantitative and qualitative data measures. Some of the quantitative, obviously meteorological and climatological data in the form of temperature and precip data. Out west, we use the snowpack data from NRCS and other agencies like California Snow Surveys. soil moisture data, and then all the hydro data, including stream flows, reservoirs, groundwater. And more recently, we've started integrating a variety of different satellite-based products like vegetation health and fire danger, evaporative demand, Palmer index, and we also have some objective blends which combine a number of indices together. Looking at the quantitative data, Kelly covered most of that. And we get quite a bit of emails from folks from the state teams as well. And this is just a kind of a screenshot of some of the indicators that we use. And this is just within a particular week. And here's 30 indicators alone, and we use more than that. But as you can see, the indicators don't always agree at different timescales and between different indicators. So how we resolve that is through our convergence of evidence approach. And basically, we're looking at where most of the indicators are pointing. And sometimes things are weighted more heavily than others. For example, in the Western US during the cool season, we're obviously weighting snowpack data very heavily when we're looking, when we're doing the assessments during the wintertime. And this is just a conceptual view of what our convergence of evidence approach and what goes into the map and some of the different indicators that we're looking at. We also use potential drought impacts as well. The National Drought Mitigation Center did a really nice little project several years back, and trying to look at it at a state level, what the potential impacts are within the various states. And what you see on the left are basically what had they'd come up with from getting input from various folks from Nevada. And again, we're also open to taking additional recommendations as to other ones if we've missed anything. Taking a look at some of the how we actually go about making the map. So the individual author for the week is the one who's essentially not only doing the analysis, but they're also creating the map within a GIS system. So currently we're using ArcMap to create the maps. As you can see on the left, these are a variety of different indicators at different time scales. And what I can do is just click on and off on these different indicators and take a look, where those indicators are falling within a particular area classification of drought. We're currently in the process of moving over to ArcPro, which is the next version of ArcMap, and having a centralized GIS repository for all the data products. This is tricky in pulling all the data products because they often move and change. So this is going to be really helpful for the authors. And these next few slides, just a real quick view of how the analysis is done. On this, for example, you can see this is a D3 and D2 area in Nevada. I've turned on the transparency to make the layer so you can see through it, and I have shaded relief underneath. And this is looking at stream flows, and basically I have the percentile ranking for the 7-day average stream flow. So we can basically turn on and off different indicators to get a closer look at what's going on in an area. And then we go about, if we're going to edit the layer itself, this is what the layer looks like. This is just a series of vertices, and we can drag this and make it larger or smaller.
3 minutes, David.
Okay, thank you. Last few slides here, I just wanted to take a look at, this is a time series graph of drought in Nevada from 2000 when the Drought Monitor started operations through current. And as you can see, drought is a naturally occurring feature within the climate in this area. It's the driest state in the country. And you can see in the last decade, we've had extended periods of drought, with the longest period lasting 5 years from 2012 to 17, and the current drought all the way on the right, which was the most intense that we'd seen in the state on our record since 2000. We're at 80% of the state in D3 to D4. On the bottom, these are Haywood plots. And what they are is, on the left, this is precipitation for the water year. So that's October through September. On the right, same thing for average temperature. But I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of where we are in terms of the observational record with temperature and precip. And you can see on the y-axis, that is precipitation, cumulative. On the right, this is tracking it through the year. And you can see the top 5 wettest are on the top, and falling into that was the 2004-2005 season. Top 10 driest was our 2020 to 21 season. So there's not as much of a pattern that you're seeing in more recent times that it's necessarily getting drier. And mind you, this is looking at a state level. But you can see a clear signal on the average temperatures, where you have 4 out of the 5 driest on record that have occurred since 2000. And the last slide here, these are some of the, and this is just my own personal perspective, some of the challenges for drought monitoring in Nevada. Just the basic question of, what does drought look like in the driest state in the country? We've got a very large spatial extent. We have a lot of mountain ranges and an associated degree of variability associated with the complex terrain. And the temperature or precipitation ranging from 4 inches to 40 inches. Another question is, with the warming temperatures, what kind of impacts are we starting to see on the landscape in terms of ecological impacts or impacts to springs and so forth. We have a low station density overall statewide. And you can see on the bottom right, those are locations. This isn't all stations in the state, monitoring stations, but these are ones with long-term records. You can see we have a lot of gaps in the state. And then lastly, how does drought affect ecosystems and hydrologic systems in the state, and how do we integrate that information into the assessments? I think we have some real challenges in terms of that, as well as just in monitoring in general. If you look at the bar graph on the top, I've kind of outlined an area for April and May, and this is looking at precipitation for the different climate regions or climate divisions within Nevada. And I've highlighted April and May, and you can see that northeastern Nevada receives a good chunk of their precipitation in the springtime. And that springtime precipitation is really important for that greening up of the grasses. So if the precipitation doesn't fall during those months, you could see issues related to grazing. And I bring this up in that, just having knowledge of, the timing of the precipitation annually is very important in looking at, some of the kind of nuances in drought monitoring within the state. Sorry for going so fast through this. I have a lot more slides I'd like to cover in perhaps another presentation moving forward, but any questions or comments?
Thank you, David. That was an excellent overview of the U.S. Drought Monitor. Nicole, do we have any questions for our presenter?
We have one question right now. D1 or D2 often tend to be Nevada's baseline condition. So could there be a point where it makes sense to adjust drought rankings to reflect a new normal? So that would be D0.
There's been some discussion about that, not in terms of changing the classification, But in looking at some of the data indicators, as recently they changed the normal period shifted to the latest 30-year period. And there's some question whether we should be looking at more recent indicators as they're more representative of the climate of what's going on now with warming temperatures and more extreme events and so forth. But if we change that, then we're going to have an issue with using percentile rankings, because the percentile rankings use the entire period of record. And I still think that's valuable to be using the entire period of record.
Okay, we have another question. What action, in your opinion, would make the biggest difference or impact in improving drought monitoring in Nevada?
I can name a couple things I think would really improve things, and some of these have been touched upon in previous presentations, but I think one of the big things is impacts reporting. I think is a big area in which we could see some improvement. The impact reporting tends to be, from my observations, tends to be sporadic, and we don't often have a really good idea statewide on what kind of impacts are occurring around the state. So I think that's one area. Also, another issue would be in terms of the station density in the state. We're currently working on a NOAA NIDIS funded project to identify monitoring gaps in the state. I'm working with Dan McAvoy here at the Climate Center, as well as Steph McAfee from the State Climate Office. And I think that's another area we can improve because of that wide variety of spatial variability. It would be nice to know what's going on in at a finer scale. But I also think another area of improvement would be in terms of some of the coordination end of things. Often with drought, if we're in a severe state of drought, we'll have folks from various agencies come in and participate in the process and provide input for a period of time, and then folks kind of drop off. I think it's important for us as authors that we have a consistent group of people and getting input that's coming in on a regular basis. It's hard to get a good idea of what's going on with the drought if you're not looking at it, on a weekly basis and seeing how that's evolving throughout the year, rather than just kind of coming into the picture and looking at things once things get severe.
Okay, if we have more questions, Nicole, we'll need to save it until the end. We need to move on to our next presenter. Thank you, David. Thanks again. That was
all right.
excellent.
Thank you.
Before I introduce our next speaker, I would also like to mention that, again, continue using Slido for questions and comments, but also to note that there has been a poll added in the Slido, on the Slido website we're using, or webpage, as you may want to call it. But there's a poll that's been added. It will be left open to the end of the day. And the question for this poll is, what tools and messaging has worked well for you? So if you're interested in answering that, that would be very helpful and insightful. And moving on, our next speaker is Chris Moreno with an overview of the Nevada Department of Agriculture Outreach and Engagement. Chris Moreno works for the Nevada Department of Agriculture on the Drought Program within the Division of Plant Health and Compliance. Chris has a background in environmental studies and has worked with federal and county governments in his previous positions as an environmental health specialist in Montana and as an environmental protection specialist in Arizona. So whenever you're ready to share your screen, Chris, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Bunny.
Perfect.
You guys can see everything?
Looks great.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you again for having me. This has been a great discussion. And let's get to it. Let's talk some more drought. So I'm going to cover some things today. Essentially, I'm going to be focusing on the drought program with the Nevada Department of Agriculture, of course, and working on our outreach efforts, the challenges I've faced, and some of the lessons that we've learned. This picture there is from Hidden Valley in Reno, just looking at Mountain Rose there. And our mission at the Department of Agriculture is to preserve, protect, and promote Nevada agriculture. And so the drought program was added in late 2017, I believe, to the department. And they've been a few people in the previous position, but I've been here since 2019. And it's been a unique position because we'll get more into the details of how my timing, arrival, and what we're experiencing now have kind of come together. Okay, so whenever we're doing outreach, our main kind of widgets that we're trying to hit and cover are what are the current drought conditions, essentially pulling some data from the U.S. Drought Monitor that we were just covering. I also like to add in what are available and relevant resources related to the drought. So for example, some of the USDA programs as well as NRCS are things we kind of tend to push. The other messaging we focus on is drought impacts. We want to know what's going out there as much as everyone else. We want to know for kind of a little bit more specific reason. We want to know what's going on in terms of their economic, impacts as well. So that's kind of where it ties into when I'm fishing for questions and trying to find out what producers are dealing with. I have an ear for anything that can kind of say, oh, hey, here's a cost that isn't prepared or isn't planned for, and then how can we address it? And then also, as a reminder to a lot of our producers, I like to drop that we had an award for a drought initiative grant that was in 2018, and that was another kind of product of the drought forum that was held here in Nevada in 2015. We awarded just under $500,000 to about 10 different award recipients. A lot of those people I keep in touch with regularly. They're kind of my go-to for kind of getting quick updates on how things are going, as well as how things have progressed throughout the drought. So it's nice to remind people that we're willing to do things when we can. So this is kind of what I was mentioning earlier. When I arrived in 2019, we were kind of coming out of a wet year, and it was a great opportunity for me to meet a lot of the farmers that were involved with our program. So I was able to do some visits. I was able to travel most of the state and get to do some tours. This was really just great to just get a feel for the lay of the land, to learn about what the environment is like here, and to understand some of those personal issues that the producers are seeing on the ground. The best thing about it was we had just given people those award money, so I was able to kind of go through their entire irrigation system and see how the new pumps, the new meters, the new pivots that we had provided were working, and it was fascinating to see that, because it just seeing the smiles on a lot of those farmers when I showed up was a nice interaction, and having them kind of be happy to talk to me was great. So that definitely opened the door, made it easy for me to kind of get to know them and keep the communication open. Yeah, like I said, it's great also to understand how those specific environments affected different areas. Some of the solutions that the producers were doing are just not going to work in other areas, just because of topography, methods of water delivery, and so on and so forth. So kind of getting an idea for each unique farm's situation also helped me do better in my communication with them. The other great thing about getting out there and being there in person was that I had a lot of opportunities to kind of really work and show and tell them with different things that were available. I don't think the Seymour had the mobile capability at the time. Otherwise, that would have been a great thing to just kind of sit next to them and do. But I did mention to them about the program, and I referred them to a website. But it was interesting to see as well how some of the older farmers who have been doing this for decades are not so much reluctant to kind of adapt and change their ways, but they just, I think, need a little bit more time to kind of understand what's going on. And so when I showed up to the farms and I had a bunch of flyers and papers and kind of told them, hey, look, I know this is a lot, but there's a lot of useful stuff here, and I'll call back in, check with you, and kind of see where you're at, see if you've tried any of these resources that I put out there. So that was a great opportunity to kind of give them something directly to them. And yeah, so it was just a great opportunity and the most successful kind of outreach effort when you're actually visiting them on their farm. That's good. And so kind of fast forward to now, outreach efforts the last couple of years were very limited. I had a couple opportunities, but I was only able to attend one event in 2021. The plan this year is to kind of get me back out there a little bit more and partner with some of our other departments with their programs to kind of just get more of that face-to-face time with them, as well as remind them that we have a drought program that is able to help. And then outreach efforts, that addition to that has been phone calls, producer meetings, and our NDA newsletter. We'll talk a little bit more about those as we move on. All right, so one of the things I did create this last fall was a drought flyer. And this was specific for a lot of the timely kind of impacts we were seeing out there. I know we talked a little bit about some of those FSA programs, and that's kind of what I did. I just summarized some of those programs in a nutshell, reminded them of deadlines, and told them to just reach out to their local FSA offices, and also created a lot of those handouts so we could give out to the events. Also, I was interviewed on a couple media sources here on RFD-TV and RGJ, Reno Gazette Journal. So that was great to kind of just be able to get more of our voice out as well. So a new effort that we've just begun, this began this last December, and it was the quarterly newsletter. And this is kind of just one of those more email directed newsletters that are very short too. We're trying not to make these lengthy. And we have just a quick update on drought conditions, a quick reminder of whatever relevant resources out there, as well as like future resources that may be coming down the line. And then also just a reminder to get in touch with me if they have any questions and so on. And then so direct phone calls. This has been, again, kind of the main source for me to get a lot of my information. It's led me to a lot of interesting conversations that I think would not have happened otherwise. And so what I mean by that is when I'm calling somebody that I'm not familiar with and I'm explaining to them what I'm calling about, just kind of trying to pick their brain about drought impacts, I'll tend to mention with some of those other programs I just mentioned about FSA to kind of start the conversation. But honestly, it comes down to just being a good listener. I feel that a lot of the times I try to shoot for these calls to not be more than 15 minutes. Most of them, the good conversations end up being well over that. So it ends up kind of being a bit of a time management issue there with how often I'm able to make these calls, because I don't want to cut these people short. This is kind of the lifeline that I have to a lot of these relevant information. So I tend to focus a lot of my attention on those, as well as social media posts. Our public information officer readily posts things for us. We have a good kind of relationship with the other departments within our program so that we don't kind of overlap each other and try to, everybody's trying to say everything at the same time. So they have a good tracking for that. Fastest way to get our content out. And they also do help us or have helped me before to push out some other agencies' information. For example, the DWR survey, I told them to kind of, hey, let's push that out. And so that was another thing that they were able to help us with. Okay, so now I want to move on to some of the challenges. I kind of talked a little bit briefly about what I've been experiencing, but let's get into more of the details. So for the conversation, I mentioned like how do we kind of approach this? When I arrived in 2019, we were coming off a wet year, and it was easy to kind of see the relaxed kind of attitude that people had about it, especially with those producers that we had awarded, who I was visiting to, who were just like, well, yeah, wet year, and we got new equipment, so we're doing pretty good. So that was kind of interesting to kind of ask them if they're aware of other things. And they were just like, no, we got all this stuff. And a lot of them have little local weather stations too that they rely on. That's a big important resource for them, is kind of knowing what's happening specifically to their area. So when talking about this drought and how we're going through these slow moving disasters, another thing I brought up is reminders of past drought experiences, right? And so how has their previous experience kind of helped their decisions today? This has been something that I've been making good notes of this time around, because to keep these experiences at the forefront, I think is important when we're kind of coming out of drought and experiencing a little bit of wet periods. This one, we're always in drought. Not true, but it's always good to be prepared for drought. Kind of what I was just mentioning about how there's that mindset that tends to overlook severity when you're not experiencing those difficult times. And I've never actually, in my conversations, I've never actually heard anyone say that, but I have heard them say things like, oh, it was always dry, or we're used to it. We're used to the dry weather and stuff, but it still carries the same message, I think. And so kind of just being conscious of that these producers have been there for years, and they know the conditions better. So I trust their judgment in terms of how severe they're experiencing going through, but I'm also aware of a lot of the science behind what's actually happening in their neighborhoods. Okay, so another challenge here is just translating some of the science jargon and terms to kind of easier methods to understand. And I love this drought outlook map by the Climate Prediction Center, because they kind of do both of them in one of their images here. And I'll just read a quick note. It says, so on the top right, it says, depicts large-scale trends based on subjectivity, derived probabilities guided by short and long-range statistical and dynamical forecasts. Great, that's awesome. And then I love how they put right below it, drought persists, drought remains, drought removal likely. So I definitely, when I read this information, if they already have something simple, that's kind of the main point that I'll push when I'm talking about this or showing it to somebody. When there's different kind of summaries or water reports, then I'll tend to do that on my own and kind of just pick something that just to communicate quickly to them. And one thing I've learned too is some of the people are really interested in knowing that full science thing. So I'll always provide with them a link to wherever I got my information, so that they have the full resource as well if they want to dive more into it.
Chris, 2.5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So some of the challenges, virtual events were not very popular with producers. Again, this is information I've learned through a lot of my calls. My main reason for them not attending is just they're busy and they can't set aside time to kind of sit down at a computer, as opposed to kind of the more in-person events they would attend to regularly. They can kind of adjust their schedules to be gone for the whole day to attend those. Messaging via email, great. Does get lost in their inbox. I have to follow up with those emails kind of persistently to get responses sometimes. Traditional mail, I actually think this is pretty effective when it's done in a timely way. So what I mean by that is when I'm asking for information, or if I'm asking for a follow-up on something, I'm giving them a date is just an easy way to kind of keep up with that. And then it also gives me a simple way to kind of follow up with them as well. Sending them self-addressed envelopes too, because sometimes I'd like to have them fill out things. That works great. So yeah, so it's kind of summarizing the challenges. It's been challenging past 2 years, and looking forward to kind of moving on to more in-person engagements. And yeah, let's move on to lessons learned here. So what I was talking about, oh yeah, some of the other issues with the time commitment thing was not just length of those calls, but also getting a hold of them. So a lot of the producers have their voicemail boxes full. So that's annoying, and it requires me to kind of call back multiple times. Texting is also great. So that's been another way to kind of get around that, is just asking them, hey, this is Chris from NDA. I'd like to talk to you, or if you could send me photos of what you're seeing. That's also been successful in getting more information from them. Drought relief resources. So I've learned a lot about these programs because I have been kind of the news bearer in a lot of cases. A lot of those other outreach efforts I mentioned that FSA does do tend to get kind of lost in the shuffle sometimes. And so this last year was timely with some of the new programs they released when I had the opportunity to talk to them, and they'd mention, oh, I think I saw something like that in an email or a letter. So that was a great opportunity to kind of just remind them that there are programs available and that their local FSA offices are going to definitely be the one to get them the most information out of it. So that's been a pleasant conversation to have with them. And again, good news that I'm bringing them. Messaging for video tutorials are great. I tend to refer to people to these as well. This tends to be just something they can share easily and kind of click through which programs they want to learn about specifically. Alternative crops, TEF is growing interest in Nevada. And so this has kind of been something that, is seen as an alternative, which is less water intensive. This is something that, I want to promote as well, because we've seen some interest with the hemp industry kind of developing, but there's kind of a lot of legal issues and kind of paperwork with that one involved, and TEF tends to be an easier alternative product for them to investigate and research. Native seeds also are a good option for ornamental and more local residential areas. We try to encourage those, but those have also suffered during the drought as far as collection. Diversified farms are the most kind of secure way to go. A lot of the large scale farms don't have a lot of availability with kind of changing their methods. So we've seen smaller farms that I've been in contact with that are able to do really well during this drought, even though they've had water shutoffs because of their dynamic just water reclamation that they have on site. They're able to kind of continue using use. And so diversity is definitely key. One of the methods they use is solar pumps to kind of recycle some of that water as well. That's been something that's been very helpful for some smaller scale farms. And then I'll just cover some unique problems that we've seen. So there's been a debris flow issues near Lamoille Canyon. So that's caused some issues with water deliveries. I've heard about one calf loss from smoke conditions. Cash levels are low, groundwater levels are low, pumps aren't pumping as much. These are the things that I'm hearing out there. And then on top of that, the livestock impacts, there's a lack of foraging and record high costs for demand. And also pregnancy tests for cows was an unexpected cost. So this is kind of what we're looking for when we talked about gaps in funding. And just, we're not alone in this drought. So I remind people there's a lot of agencies out there helping us. I took this screen from the Living the Drought website. So that's a great resource I always push as well. And that's all I'll have for now. So open it up for questions.
Thank you, Chris. That was an excellent overview of what you've been up to in the agricultural sector. Nicole, I think we have time for one question for Chris, or if there's a couple, but do we have questions for Chris?
Yes, I have one right now. Do you think there are sufficient resources available, government or otherwise, to encourage and jumpstart drought planning and response actions for producers?
That's a tough one. I feel like there are, but I feel like getting a hold of somebody within the department or agency that is offering that is going to be the hardest part. So I think connecting those folks that are interested in creating drought plans, because I've offered to kind of help with people to make a water management plan or to kind of look at their water irrigation plan to kind of at least get another set of eyes that can kind of see where there might be some inefficiencies. So that's something that our department does offer. But yeah, there's not people pounding at the door for that. I have to pry to kind of get those types of information. So so yeah, I'd say as far as our department is, I would be the person kind of to help with that. And I imagine other agencies would have somebody along that line. Whether or not they're available and all that is kind of a question I don't know.
Okay, and Bunny, the remaining questions are for all panelists, or there were a couple more for Dave.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. Thank you for joining us. So for this final round of questions, participants can raise their hands in Zoom to be unmuted to ask their question. And I would ask that you please state your name and affiliation and then ask your question, or you can continue to put questions in Slido using slido.com, and the link is in the chat, and the participant information is #NV Drought. If I could have the other panelists join, I guess we could begin by the questions that we have in Slido, and then we'll be monitoring for raised hands. Nicole, did we have?
Yeah, I've got one more for Chris. Do you
Oh.
see need for increasing outreach and drought communication, or is the accrued past knowledge and drought experience enough for producers?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a need for more. And the reason I say that is because I've seen farms change hands from owners. And so, and that information is kind of difficult to ascertain without talking to them regularly and kind of keeping those relationships going. So that would be one example I could think of where we would want to keep outreach efforts up there, just to kind of make sure we're not missing somebody who maybe is new to the area or is just acquired new farmland and has, you know, a sudden change in how they're working with their operation that that could be impacted by drought.
All right, thanks.
Do we have any raised hands?
Doesn't look like it, but I've got more questions here in Slido.
Perfect. Let's carry on with that.
Yeah, so here's one for Dave. Is there any discussion or desire from the Drought Monitor authors to have another drought monitor from the Western US?
I'm not sure I totally understand like a completely separate map that just focuses on the West, or?
I think it's asking specifically about authors.
Oh, adding authors. Okay.
Mhm.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we've had a lot of discussion about adding another Western author. I think the challenge has been actually just finding somebody with the right skill set and the time to actually do it. And we do have some requirements in terms of where the people who are the authors, they either have to be, as I mentioned in the presentation, they have to be either from a federal agency or center, or at a regional center. So we've looked, and we'd like to have another Western author added on, but we just have not identified that person yet.
All right, and it looks like the next 4 questions are directed at any of the panelists. So I'll start with the first one that we had earlier. That was for Carrie Jean. Can we measure that response to drought is better now than it was in the past?
I can take a stab at it. Well, a couple things. So if you're looking at response, maybe we can break that down too. I'd say from the monitoring aspect, I think things have improved substantially. We've got much better coordination, especially in Nevada, with the help of NIDIS, and we're combined with the California coordination team as well. So we were having a lot better discussions, more people involved in it. We have a substantial amount of additional indicators as compared to, say, going back in to 2010 or 15. We have a number of more indicators that we can pull into the system in terms of a lot of the satellite-based indices, which are really helpful in filling the gaps in Nevada. In terms of the actual response, I think that's somewhat linked to the monitoring and how effective that's been. So, but But one thing I would say with the response is similar to the participation with folks in the USDM process, is I feel on, and this is only my opinion, on the state level, higher up in the state level, that there seems to be more interest when we're in a very severe situation and it becomes national news and so forth, which it has been. But I feel like there's a lot of attention paid to it, like in the last long drought that we had 2012 through 17, the Western Governors Association got involved, and there was a lot of meetings involved with that group of people and others. But I feel like it kind of it tapered off a bit. Like people come into it and then I don't know if it's losing interest or they have other issues in the state that they're dealing with. But so I would say overall, it's kind of ebbed and flowed in terms of the participation and the effectiveness of the response.
Yeah, and you know, I'd say from the agricultural view, I think it's hard to measure it, but from the conversations I've had, it seems that the producers have an understanding of, okay, we're not going to have as many cuttings this year, or we're going to have to fallow X amount of acres. And so I think the more they experience it, the more they're kind of aware of that for their specific area, for their specific farm or ranch. So very hard to quantify, but I would imagine that and assume that the responses have improved a lot on the agricultural side, and especially for the experienced farmers that have been doing it for a while.
Yeah, I just second that. It's hard to measure accurately, but all indications are improvement.
Can I offer one thing that may seem a little off the wall in this? May I share my screen for just a second? We have this, one of the things that we do every week at the Drought Center is are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
I send out this media drought index, and it's kind of to get at quantifying interest in drought based on the rate of news coverage. So this right now is, I've selected Nevada as the state. The bottom time series is the Drought Severity and Coverage Index, which is the US Drought Monitor boiled down to one statistic or added up into one statistic. And this top time series chart is the Media Drought Index, which is a standardized, it's a quantification of the amount of chatter about drought within a particular state for that state's month. So, you know, it's comparing within the state. There's a lot that can be done by way of ensuring that we're actually filtering and capturing all the relevant media sources. But, you know, initially, it seems like this kind of bears out what you've described, what various speakers have described, that Nevada is in some degree of drought most of the time. People have gotten used to it. They're not talking about it very much. But during the mid-teens, when it was pretty bad, you saw more interest. And then I don't know what, this was probably some one or two stories that were happening in April of last year where you saw a real spike. I hope that's not a mistake. And then more recent interest. But that's one way to just kind of gauge, you know, does the conversation, the shape and the scope of the conversation match the intensity of drought in a state?
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I was
Did you
interested.
have? All right, the next question, I think Bunny might want to weigh in on this one too. Are there any issues or challenges with communication between the state level, for example, with the State Drought Plan, and the federal level, for example, with the Drought Monitor?
That's a loaded question. Are there any issues or challenges with communication? State Drought Plan and the Drought Monitor. I know that we are talking about updating well, not talking about, we are in the process of beginning an update to the drought response plan for Nevada. And one thing that has been mentioned, Steph has brought up, is taking a look at the stages that are in our plan. And this touches on something that you've all, or a few of you have mentioned, that if we have some level of aridity, some level of dryness in the state, taking a look at the triggers that we have in place for the 3 stages for our response plan. So that would be one thing off the top of my head that comes to mind. Did you want to add to that, Steph? Because I know this is a concern for you.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. So some of the preliminary results are actually that if you look across all of the counties in Nevada, only Elko County is in the lowest stage of our drought plan, drought watch, less than 50% of the time, or has been since 2000 when the drought monitor went into effect. And Elko County is in drought watch 49.3% of the time. So yeah, this does kind of suggest that we may need to think about how often and how intensely the state drought response plan should be engaged at these sort of lower levels of drought. Since we do, right, since in Nevada, we experience them so often. And I've heard this quote, I don't think it was from a farmer or rancher in Nevada, but it was someone in the West, is that we may not always be in drought, but we're always 10 days from being in drought. And so, you know, I think that is worth thinking about. You know, obviously, it does help to have some coordination between the state levels of drought response and what triggers fast track, because it might get a little awkward for people if they're like, well, why does the federal government acknowledge that we are in drought severe enough to warrant disaster resistance or disaster assistance, while as the state's like, no, we're fine, totally fine, it's great. I see Chris nodding. I'm wondering if you've run into this as well this year, Chris.
I might add one thing that may or may not. I think that the USDM data is used to represent drought right in real time. But because 85% of the land is managed by the feds in Nevada, it's kind of used as a perspective that it ties, it kind of prohibits flexible grazing because it ties kind of the amount of animal units that can go onto the land to the drought monitor. That's the only tension I really see between our state and federal, where the USDM, in terms of what it does, what the work that it does de facto on the ground, that it wasn't intended or nor designed to do necessarily.
I have an observation on the disaster relief on the federal level that I've noticed within the state, not as much in recent time, but the 12 to 17 drought, because of some of the issues with shutting down or portions of allotments within the state. Some of the big allotments, like the Argenta allotment, is you often get, getting impacts information and hearing from the ranchers is kind of can go one direction or the other. In one sense, some folks don't like seeing drought on the map, some of the ranchers, because then their allotment can get closed off. And then they point at the drought monitor for that. But then on the other end of the spectrum, folks are often pushing when drought perhaps isn't as severe as we see it to be, are pushing for the D3, D4 designation because they're looking to get the eligibility for the disaster relief. So it puts us in a tricky situation in terms of, interpreting the impacts information and
did we have any more questions in the chat or any raised hands in the
We
audience?
We do have a few more questions, but I'm not sure we have time for them. There was a request for Kelly to share the link from what she shared a minute ago.
We also briefly had a raised hand, and so I don't know if we have time for that question.
We're down to 2 minutes. I'm going to have to say no.
Okay.
No, I want to go longer, but we'll have to have some follow-up and some more discussions along this line. I think it's been a great workshop today. And so this brings us to the end of our workshop. And I do want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank all the panelists and all the team we had to support the putting together of this workshop. And today's insights will be used to identify opportunities for collaboration going forward to address drought needs, planning, mitigation, and response. Also, we will be sending out PDFs of the presentations and today's recording in an email later this week. Also, I want to do a reminder that in Slido, that poll was added. If you wanted to answer that question or make comments, you can go to the Slido and do that, slido.com. Again, it's #nv.drought. The question was in the poll, let's see, what tools and messaging has worked well for you? So if you want to take the time and do that, please do. Also, we hope you can join us for the last workshop on drought, which is going to be focused on resources, funding, and projects. That's on February 16th. And all these efforts are to continue moving Nevada towards drought resiliency. And I do believe that is the close. And again, thank you all for joining us. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you very much, Money.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bunny, for doing the extension bit for us too. I know that's just another extra ask, but I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Definitely appreciate it because, yeah, it is one of those things where like